any relevance of native speaker norms? That's a question for TEFLologists. Is it better to focus on form or to focus on forms? That's a question for TEFLologists. If you use a textbook, is your classroom authentic, or should your approach be more learner-centric, from feedback to learner autonomy? We'll discuss it all on TEFLology.
Hello, and welcome to the TEFLology Podcast, a podcast all about teaching English as a foreign language and related matters. This week, we have a guest-hosted episode, and we're pleased to welcome Susana Perez Castillejo and Carlos Seoane, who are two of the founders of Extempore, an app for language students and instructors. As we are many kilometers and time zones away from Susana and Carlos, we emailed them some questions, which they recorded themselves answering. We were very happy to hear from Susana and Carlos, and we're sure you'll find their answers very interesting. Enjoy.
First of all, could you explain exactly what Extempore is?
So let me take 30 seconds for those of you who are not familiar with Extempore.
Those of you teachers who are not using Extempore.
Yeah, what are you waiting for, by the way? So Extempore, at its gist, is we call it the speaking practice app, and it's essentially a multi-platform, multi-language, or language-agnostic, platform-agnostic tool for teachers. So the way it works is teachers could create an activity on the Extempore website or on their phone, iPad, whatever it is. It doesn't matter where you are. And that activity could be, a question, written question. It would be something that you record. It would be something you upload. Images. So there's, many types of prompts. You record them on the Extempore platform, and then we make it available to your students on the mobile app or on their Chromebooks or laptops, through a Chrome or Firefox browser. Every activity that you create has the parameters that Susana was talking about, right? So you can say, I want a truly spontaneous response. So I want the student to respond with video. I want them to have timers so they don't over-prepare. I want them to have one attempt or multiple attempts, whatever the instructor configures. And then the student answers on their phone, their iPad, their computer, on their own time.
And maybe we should add that it's not just an individual activity. You could also do group activities. Yeah. You can choose how many students are actually accessing that prompt and doing something with it.
Yeah, some sort of more collaborative, interpersonal way. Mm-hmm. It's a good point. And so then all those recordings that the students do on their app are made available back to the instructor on the grading portal, and that's where the instructor will either grade against the rubric that I created. They can provide written feedback, audio feedback, or video feedback. So we have a lot of ASL people using Extempore for American Sign Language.
Let me add something here. The student does nothing. Only press something that says submit. Okay, that's the only thing, and that's a blessing for a teacher. Okay, all my students' files are on the cloud, and I access them by clicking my student's name. I don't have to change the name of the file. I don't get a lot of emails with the same type of file for my students. So that's another thing that
we've had customers that were doing this over text message. So they would have the students text a audio file to the teacher. So the teacher ends up with 30 texts.
Who would do that?
A very committed teacher who doesn't really know the good technology yet. They're not doing that any longer, by the way. The idea is, again, make that process way seamless, keep it all organized, get rid of the logistics, and ensure a spontaneous response, an authentic response, which is really what's
and then again, going back to the teacher perspective, you are accessing those files on the cloud, and you're grading, providing feedback with a rubric that you create as an instructor, and it's customizable. You just decide which criteria you want to grade on, and then you provide either written, audio, video feedback, whichever you feel like. And you can do it on your phone or your computer, whichever is more convenient to you.
And you can play the responses at double speed, which, people in a foreign language tend to speak slowly. So you have the waveform, you play at double speed, and you've done in a quarter of the time when you would do face-to-face.
And that is another blessing. Just imagine, the amount of pauses that I don't have to go through when I'm listening to my students. And not that they're, pauses communicate something, but sometimes as a teacher, I don't need those. So I just played fast. So
some of the feedback that people do, for example, they will actually interject a comment in the student's submission. So you play in the student's submission, and then you'll go like, stop it. Hey, you mispronounce idiosyncrasy. It's not idiosyncrasy, right? And then you play again. So the student hears themselves, and then they hear themselves with your interjected comments for pronunciation, for grammar, for whatever it is. Right?
Yeah.
But it's a very neat way to have it all in one place, right?
Could you tell us about your background and how Extempore came into being?
There are 3 original founders to Extempore.
One of them is me. I'm Susana Perez Casillejo, and I'm a professor of Spanish linguistics at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I have been teaching Spanish as a second language in the U.S. for about 20 years now in different settings, in middle school, in community colleges, at large universities, and I'm now in a private liberal arts college where we are actually recording this podcast.
In the basement. And then we have another co-founder who couldn't be with us today. His name is Stephen Fluin, and he's sort of our chief architect, technical co-founder, very bright technologist, and he's the one who ensures that we're using the very latest technologies and the very best of everything. So he acts as the chief architect, overseeing the overall direction of technology to the rest of the team. And then my name is Carlos Seoane. I'm the third co-founder. I'm just a dumb business guy. I'm not an academic by any stretch of the imagination, but languages and education have been in my life really since the beginning. So I'm originally from Spain. I grew up in Spain, started in Germany, then lived in the Netherlands for a few years, and then moved to the US in 2003. So I've been using languages in my entire professional career. I've always been working in technology and running technology businesses. I'm also the son of 2 professors, and I'm married to a professor. So education is really in my blood since I was born.
And that professor he's married to is me, in case you haven't picked that up. Let me talk a little bit about the idea of Extempore. The trigger was a pain point in the life of every language teacher, I think, and it's performing oral assessments at the end of the semester or the end of the year.
That just sent a shiver of fear down the audience's spine, I'm sure. But.
So imagine the situation. Well, all of you, I'm assuming the listeners are language teachers, all of you have that situation where you get to the end of the semester, you have to do oral exams, and you are going to meet individually with every single student that you have. And imagine you have 20 students in one class. So you're meeting for 10 minutes with one of them. What do the others do? If you are in middle school, it's complicated. If you are in college, those others are studying maybe. You could also get to the language lab and reserve it if you're fortunate and your colleagues have not reserved it already. Get there. And then there's the logistics of teaching the technology to your students or reminding them about how to use the technology. So those are some of the things that I pointed out to my husband during some conversations. And Stephen, right?
Well, I think we had this sort of, there must be an app for that syndrome, right? This has to be a better way to do this. There's the technology, there's the cloud. You shouldn't have to move people into a room to just record them. That didn't feel right to people like us who've been working in technology since, the late 90s, right? So the conversation came up with Stevens, like, okay, we really have identified a problem that we know a huge chunk of people have. Let's identify a technology that can fix that problem.
Yeah, and there was also the opportunity, okay, because we were talking about apps, about maximizing the ubiquitousness, if that's a word.
It is now.
It is. Well,
it's official. It's in a podcast.
It is a word. I did not pronounce it right. But what I'm trying to say is I teach college, and all of my students have cell phones, and they bring them to class. How could I make use of those to facilitate what I was trying to do and accomplish? And that was very, very interesting at that point. How can we not just solve my pain point, but actually take advantage of something that is going on in the classroom,
right?
Which is the use of cell phones.
Right. Now, like any other product and any other idea that you have, it's been evolving, right? So where we started with this idea of, let's do a cute app that can solve the pain of oral exams. As we started marketing and we started talking to customers, we realized that the opportunity was much bigger. So one of our biggest customers was a large private K-12 school in New York City. And they came to us and they said, hey, we have a language lab. This is the most expensive real estate in the world. It's always empty except during exams. We also have an iPad program. We want to get rid of the language lab and put Extempore in the iPad program and essentially have the same thing just in the classroom and every classroom. And we were like, oh, that's totally a great idea. I should totally do that. So we kind of stumbled into this, industry that maybe we can disrupt. I mean, we have a better way of doing things that people are doing. So that was kind of the first epiphany that we had built was bigger than just an oral exam tool. And then some of our next bigger customers were universities like Temple University and others in the US who teach online. And, there really wasn't a good solution to do speaking practice, to do oral exams online. When you're teaching 1,000 students online and they all have a computer, they all have a phone, they all have an iPad, it becomes pretty obvious that maybe the way to do oral exams is not scheduling 60 Skype sessions and have 30 fail. Maybe there's a way to do it asynchronously that ensures that authenticity of the response, which is what Extempore does.
Yeah, and that's where maybe we should explain a little bit more about the timers. So one of the problems that some professors see with teaching languages online or assessing languages online is the lack of spontaneity. Okay? Well, you want to have spontaneous answers from your students when you're doing the assessment of interpersonal skills. If you're assessing another type of oral skill, that's another thing. But for interpersonal skills, you want to see some answers that have not been scripted, or you want to see what your student can do without writing the answer first. Well, how are you?
Without going to Google Translate, or without calling her American girlfriend in Japan to do the English exam, right? Just there's a way that you need to ensure that this is truly a reflection of your students' speaking skills.
Yeah.
What are the objectives of Extempore? Who's it aimed at? What does the app allow users to do? How does it support learning? And what were your intentions or goals for creating the service?
So we've already talked about the idea, the pain point that triggered the creation of Extempore. So from all that we've been explaining about what Extempore is, how it came into being, and how we use it, you can already imagine that it hasn't just solved a particular pain point. It has actually shifted the way teachers teach languages, or at least the way I teach language. And the way, the main change that I have noticed is I have increased the amount of speaking activities that I actually, and the type of speaking activities that my students do. One of a very interesting thing is that I'm not just limiting my classroom time to conversation practice. That's still happening. But I also can do more formative type assessments where at the end of the lesson, I ask my students to record a brief answer, maybe about a minute long, or maybe 2 minutes in more advanced courses in response to a prompt. But the idea is to see how much of the lesson they actually could integrate into their speaking. So that's one thing that I'm able to do at the end of class, because I don't have to take my whole classroom to a computer lab. I just tell them, okay, get your phones or get your laptops.
In your car or in the dorm tonight, right? Or whatever.
If it is homework, okay, that's another thing. So there is a shift towards having more speaking activities, a variety, different types, and also different types of activities. I want to emphasize that because not every student can take advantage of conversation practice in the classroom. There are different things going on. When you only focus your speaking practice, or you only do your speaking practice with conversations or discussions, there are always some students who speak more. There are always some students who are too shy. They just don't take advantage of those opportunities, either because they can't or they don't want to. I still need to hear how they speak. Those students that tend to be a little more anxious actually can benefit from having this alternative way of showing me what they can do in the language when they are speaking. So that's another thing that has been good.
So said another way, in a less academic manner, is when your teacher uses Extempore, you don't get to hide in the back of the class, do some quizzes and pass, right? Mm-hmm. Now you have to talk. Whether you want to talk or not, you are going to practice the target language, which is a monumentous change in how languages are being taught around.
Yeah, and I think a lot of teachers could relate to this. When we walk around, you have set up a task, and they have to be using the target language to get that task done, and you're working around the classroom. You hear the background. People are speaking, right? But then you come close to see what they are actually saying and provide some feedback, and they clam up. And all of a sudden, they just don't talk or forget everything they're saying. And some of them tell you, it's like, oh, now you're making me nervous. So how are you going to do? What are you going to do to support those students? And there are those teachers who say, well, they have to get used to it. They have to speak. Well, my point of view there is, why don't I find a way to support that type of learner? Why don't I get their speaking in a different way that suits their learning style a little better, but I still get to listen to what they say, their patterns of errors in oral communication, their pauses. So talking about frequency, how long they pause, where do they need to pause? Are they the type of student that pauses just, when thinking about what to say, or are these students pausing in the middle? Do they need to pause in the middle of the word because they don't know how to construct the word? So those two things are two things that escape you as a teacher when you're limiting your listening practice, how you listen to your students, to just the classroom setting, okay? You're missing those. And that information, actually, where and I'm getting a little bit linguistic here.
You're expected to.
But that information where the student pauses actually gives you a better idea of their proficiency. Okay, so if they need to pause in the middle of the word to think about the verb conjugation in languages that have verb conjugations, or they need to be thinking about just the word. There are grammatical problems, there are lexical problems, but those are fine things that you only notice if you really listen attentively to what your students are saying. And you cannot limit that type of input from your students to the oral exam at the end of the class, at the end of the semester. You need to get more frequent speaking practice.
So obviously this is meant to be a way to replace other things, right? I mean, people like Susanna was saying, they're shifting the way they teach to most of an oral component, increasing the amount of speaking that students do in the class, and shifting the focus from more writing, reading, and listening to more speaking, which is really what students want to do, right? So we get really good feedback from students as well, especially the more motivated students who now have an opportunity to practice and get feedback, right? The other things we should talk about a little bit is there's two more components that Extempore allows you to do, which is one is now you have a beautiful portfolio of everything, right? You can trace your evolution, your students' evolution through the semester, through the year, through their school.
You can, as a teacher, and your students can.
Yes, I was going to get that.
That's another thing, that has shifted the way, I could do it. I used to do it in the writing, who hasn't done it? The writing portfolio. It's so easy. And you get your students to reflect on that and see their patterns of error. Well, now you can do it with speaking. Students do not need to keep track of their files. You don't need to keep track of their audio files. Everything is saved there. And here I am again with a sales tone. But really, it's one of the things that facilitates one particular type of teaching. If you are into portfolios and reflection and getting the student to think critically about their progress as a language learner and a language speaker, Extempore facilitates that type of teaching.
Yeah. And I think it's rewarding. It's rewarding for the teacher. It's rewarding for the student, right? Show your student how they spoke in August when the semester started, and show them how they speak in February, how they speak in September, right?
Yeah,
and they're shocked at the progress they make. They're also good for the parents. I mean, we have teachers that we know, they'll bring an iPad into a parent-teacher conference and just play how little Johnny spoke French in August, and how he speaks French now. It's I think teachers have a hard time sometimes really showcasing their work and how, the good job they do, and how it gets results. So there's no way better to do that than actually have a recording and evolution of the recording over time. And I think that's powerful. It's not something we set up to do from the beginning, but people are really taking advantage of that.
What are some important things to consider when developing apps for language learning? How can technology, pedagogy, and linguistics be brought together and delivered effectively?
So let me start with giving a brief business answer, and then Susanna can jump in on the more technical aspect. But to me, there's two things, right? One is you need to make sure that you're solving a problem that people have and be able to explain that problem very briefly, right? So in our case, we set up to solve the problem, the pain of oral assessments. Then the market told us that we were doing more than that, but I think you need to know where we start. That's very important. And then the second thing, which is so often overlooked, is ease of use, right? We spend an inordinate amount of time making the product easy to use. It is very, very, very difficult to make something easy. and people underestimate how important usability is, right? So we debate the position of every button, we debate every label, we debate the layout of the screen at length, because if the product is not easy to use, it doesn't matter how powerful it is, people are not going to use it, right? And people need to be able to use it.
I should add that you not only debate, you also have customers, right?
Well, yes.
The advisory group, and you take into account other, the teacher's perspective on usability.
Yeah, so that's a really good point, and I apologize publicly, bow my head in sorrow for neglecting our customers. No, so we have a customer advisory board, and we have a group of fanatic customers that are very happy to pick up the phone. They have my cell phone number. They'll text me, they call me, what they like, what they don't like, what ideas they have, and it's invaluable, right? There's nothing better for an app developer to hear what the actual users, and we don't use the app, we develop it. Susanna uses it, right? There are people doing it every day. They need to tell us what they like and what they don't like. Sometimes you have people that don't like something and they're almost apologetic when they call you and like, no, this is the best thing you can do for me. The best thing you can do for me is tell me what you don't like. Because if you don't tell me, it's just going to stay there and you're going to continue not liking it. And if you don't like it, somebody else doesn't like it probably. So customer feedback and ease of use is huge for us.
Yeah, and we've also had features that have been ideas, right, from customers.
Most of them,
So the development of the app, the technological aspect, is really tied to the usage aspect in that regard.
Right.
So talking about how technology, pedagogy, and linguistics are brought together, I need to from the very beginning, the way I introduced myself and what I said, you got the idea. I'm first and foremost an educator. I'm not an instructional technologist. I use technology to support my learning goals for my students. I'm an educator and I'm a linguist. I'm teaching second language. It started as that, just to solve a particular logistic issue. And now as I explained before, having Extempore, using Extempore, has shifted a little bit the way I teach, because it supports my ideas, my philosophy on second language teaching and how languages are acquired. I operate under the assumptions of the output hypothesis that students really need to use the language, really need to speak the language in order to become better or improve their oral proficiency. So having an app, having technology that supports that particular learning goal is the way I see this technology, pedagogy, and linguistics piece bringing them together. My students are speaking more, but at the same time, I can incorporate other aspects of that theory, like the noticing. So it's not just speaking. Students have to be able to notice what are their gaps, what are the gaps in their linguistic knowledge, in the way they're talking, to do something about it and learn from them. So one type of activity that I do is I actually have my students record to a prompt an answer to a prompt without thinking too much. And then when they're done, they have to actually listen to themselves. And that is, there's research done on how the effect of that listening to themselves can have, and it's all positive. And sometimes I ask them to actually transcribe what they said, and they can do something with that language. If they thought that there was a problem, there was a word that they wanted, and they didn't have it at that moment, they can search it and then incorporate it. Or if they notice patterns with grammatical errors that keep happening, that can also be addressed. And then I ask them to either record immediately after. Sometimes I let them take there's maybe a week between when they did one activity and then they do another. And as I said before, there's research, we can pull up the reference later, on the positive effects that practice has on actually getting students to speak more and increase or improve their oral proficiency.
As app developers and creators for education and learning, what's some broader trends, changes, and innovations in the area?
So I think EdTech is fascinating when I'm giving you the non-teacher answer, right? But the way I look at it, when you go into any conference, you see this sort of the whole spectrum, right? On the one hand, you have people that are still selling books and still selling CDs and stuff like that, which is last century, and then you have stuff from next century. You have a lot of AI, really really cool cutting edge things that are being developed right now. But it always feels to me that there's a void in the middle. Right, there is a need for products that are they're not CDs, they're not AI, they work and they solve a problem, which I think is where you come in. So that when I look at the broader view, that's what I see Extempore fitting, that there's that void of just practical products that work well, that make a teacher's life easier. That's one thing. And then, you see a lot of gamification. That's clearly a trend. That's something we're moving towards as well. I think the more fun you can make the learning, the better. So there's a lot of really great tools out there. Very few for language learning, but some great generic tools that I think offer a great solution. And then, of course, there's AI. Right? AI is going to change everything, and even if it's sometimes overhyped, the promise is there. So as app developers, we need to keep an eye on it, and we have really good plans to incorporate some of that into Extempore in the near future.
Yeah,
that'll help teachers even further. But we're always from the mindset of we're helping teachers. We're not replacing teachers. We're helping teachers do their job better. That's very important.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm cautious about, there are going to be, this is speech data, something, from the way a person speaks, you can actually identify that person. And this is already tagged for you because the students are creating their accounts, giving their names, emails, and there's information about, what college or school they're attending. So there are concerns there. I have concerns when using a free tool, at least for speech recording. I'm going to have that audio data, that highly identifiable data from my students.
Which language learning settings has your app been used across? And can you tell us about some success stories?
Well, as I said before, I teach in a university, and it's mostly face-to-face teaching. We have some blended, hybrid sections, but technology supports, really. We use it to support what we do in the classroom. Extempore has been used in fully online language teaching and is extensively used by tutors who are just individual. They work on a contractor model, teaching their students, and Extempore really facilitates the teaching for them. Talking about success stories, I think this is the time when we talk about numbers and does this really work? Does this really produce learning? And the short answer is yes, of course. And let me mention, so I recently published an article on action research on cell phone use in the classroom in the Language Educator, and I report on a couple of case studies that I did with my own students. In one of the studies, it was more about attitudes and perceptions of learning, and I took into account the students' speaking anxiety. There is such a thing as second language speaking anxiety, and those of us who are teachers of a second language really know what it looks like and sounds like. What I found in that study was that those students who had higher anxiety scores were perceiving more favorably the use of Extempore to do their speaking practice, and they really perceived a benefit in using the portfolio model, where they are reflecting, they are looking at listening to themselves at different periods throughout the semester and reflecting on it. The other study was more about how much do students actually speak, because we keep claiming, yes, students are speaking more. Yes, because there are more speaking activities that we can do beyond the conversation practice in the classroom. But what about, what if we had the same task, the same prompt? What if I gave the same prompt to my students in a face-to-face interaction, or if, versus giving them the same prompt and having their answer through Extempore? And what I noticed was that when I was not in front of them, sitting face to face, when they were recording, so I was still the same audience, okay? They were recording for me their answer, and they spoke more. They spoke 25% longer when they were recording through Extempore. Well, that tells you something. There's more output, more practice, and different type of practice, and more chances for the student to actually gain proficiency. And I think, well, Carlos, I think you need to talk now about other case studies.
Yeah,
right?
so that's the sort of the quantitative analysis that we've published, right? But we also have a lot of anecdotal and sort of real life studies as well. So we just published a case study for the University of North Georgia. They use Extempore. They've used Extempore for a couple of years now across 5 campuses, replacing 5 language labs, and they have a huge sample population of students, in mostly Spanish students, Spanish and French, I think, and it was cool for us to hear how they use Extempore and how they see. So one of the things that they notice is, as the semester evolves, students speak faster and faster and faster and start speaking faster and faster, right? So when you have a student use Extempore in August or September, they take a few seconds to figure things out, and they don't know what's going on. When that student uses Extempore in December, you see just a much faster response. So that the cognitive process is just way faster. They jump into it, which to me as a non-academic, as a non-linguist, is just a reflection of somebody who's learning more, right? Who's more relaxed, who's more at ease, who's really more confident in the use of the speech. Right? So we see a lot of that. We've published case studies with Temple University as well. They use it for all their English programs. We get a lot of great feedback from students. That we've done surveys. We've had professors and teachers, K-12 teachers, do surveys on students, and the results are always overwhelmingly positive. The kids really like Extempore. They like the chance to talk more, and they would much rather talking to their phone in their car in their dorm than have to be sitting across from a teacher. That is very stressful, right?
And that the results of the study that I was saying before, that students when responding to the same prompt, my results were that students were talking longer when they were recording their answers on their phones than when they were talking face to face with me. So that's because they're not feeling so anxious to speak or on the spot in front of the professor.
Right. They're so used to using their phones, right?
And there's something there. There's something about the fact that, there are actually some researchers on technology, the role of technology in communication, and specifically in second language communication, about how cell phones are almost a part of us now. They're always with us. There's something there because we keep them close in our pocket. We're physically in contact with them all the time. So there's that element of this is speaking on my phone is something that I do regularly. So sometimes you get that comment at conferences. Some teachers tell you, so what about the authenticity? Was not authentic about talking to your phone. Really, everybody talks. You see a lot of people in bus stops or walking or jogging. They are talking to something.
Well, it's not only that.
Or someone. Their FaceTime.
We have a number of millennial employees, and they're very very comfortable taking selfies of themselves on a regular basis, about 5 per day. So if you can take a selfie, you can really record yourself in Extempore, right? It's the same. It's the same process. So they like it. Like that, we have Extempore used across K-12. We have elementary schools using it. We have postgrad system used across the entire gamut of educational levels. We have about 24 languages being taught on the app right now. Spanish and English are obviously number 1 and number 2. But we have people teaching it to use Hawaiian and Thai and Indonesian and Hebrew, right? So less commonly taught languages.
Yeah, I should add that one of the questions that we get sometimes from teachers is like, but I don't teach a very common language. How's this going to work? You type the prompt. Okay, there's nothing preventing you from not using your language. If you want to do a typed written prompt, I do use a lot of authentic videos that I have, and I just upload them to increase listening practice. We haven't talked about that, mostly the speaking. But yeah, you do your prompts, your tasks in the language that you teach. So it's really not about which language, really. It's what your learning goals are.
Sure. And that's the value, that's the flexibility of it. You use Extempore, do whatever pedagogical objectives you're trying to meet, right? Mm-hmm. Do wherever your students are at that particular week, or that particular day. You can set the same exercise 3 times if you want them to practice on this, or have the same exercise done in 3 different ways if you're practicing the same thing, right?
How can listeners to this podcast make use of your app in their own teaching or learning contexts? What are some creative uses of Extempore for students and teachers?
All right, so let me share a few of the things that I do and things that other teachers who use Extempore have shared with us that they do. We mentioned before the reflection activities that I do and other teachers do when having portfolios, speaking portfolios in the class. Another fun way to use this in the study abroad context. Some teachers actually ask their students to submit daily videos like vlogs, video blogs where they, at the end of the day, they sit down, record a video of their experience throughout the day. They are answering to some kind of question, what was the cultural learning today, or what were the 2 words that you learned today, or what is something about yourself that you learned today, or your own culture if you're doing intercultural learning. So that, repeated video, it's great for the teacher and for the student, if the student wants to keep that later on to see their progression through the study abroad process.
We have a Chinese teacher that uses her 4-year-old daughter to record prompts. So she'll have her do funny things in Chinese for the students to respond to. So the people that's very imaginative in how they use the platform once you give it to them.
Yeah, and actually as a teacher, if you have never tried it, do it. Give it a try, because when you play a child's voice, and especially if the students know that these are your children, the reaction from students is priceless. You get the, and they do pay attention, and it's fun for them to listen to the bilingual child speaking. So that's another creative way. In my business Spanish, I'm sure many of the listeners teach English for business or for professional purposes. In my business Spanish class, one assignment that students they end up liking, some students react a little, they have some attitudes before doing it, is the elevator pitch assignment, where they actually need to think about who they are, how they want to portray themselves professionally for a particular audience, and they get to practice, and then they are submitting a video doing their elevator pitch. So, it supports that type of assignment really well. And they get to submit different elevator pitches depending on what's the message that they want to convey, so that they are also learning this has to be adapted depending on who you're talking to. Do you have any other ideas in your head?
I don't have any ideas. I can monkey, ape what people are saying. So we have people using it for placement. Placement is a great use case as well, right? You have this group of students into your language program. You need to assess their skills before you admit them, or before you place them. So don't have them mail you USB keys like some universities still do, right? There are easier ways for everybody involved and cheaper ways for everybody involved to do this that actually give you a record and organize things for you.
Yeah, well, you mentioned placement. I should place program assessment, program quality assessment. If you teach within a program, your institution probably has some accountability measures. If you have a minor or a major in a particular language, you actually, your institution is asking for data. How can you ensure the quality? What are you doing to ensure quality of your program? And what some people are doing is having recordings from their students at the beginning of the program and then at the end of the program, and you can compare that data to see the progression. And so for program accountability and program assessment, this is also a good tool.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And going back to the real life activities, I need to, I'm all about authenticity. Extempore is really good for any short presentation type communication activity that you have. So I mentioned the elevator pitch, but what about voice messages? Okay, we do that all the time, leaving a voice message or listening to a voice message and having to interpret it and do something with it. So in my business Spanish class, again, that's one of the activities that they do. They have to listen to a particular voicemail that is going to have a lot of and simulate professional voicemail and have some particular vocabulary, and then they have to do something with that as if they were the ones receiving that voice message, and then they have to leave their own voice message. That's another piece.
And then the group activities, right? People are they have some pretty cool use cases for how in Extempore you can set a room and say, I'm going to have 3 students collaborate on something, and that something might be, plan a vacation or argue about Trump, right? Give them some topic that hits them up a little bit, that is a bit controversial, and you can see that sort of, asynchronous. It becomes a chat room, so, student 1 will say, I like this, student B will say, I hate this, student C will say, I hate everything, whatever it is, but the more controversial you can make the topic, the more exciting and involved it is, the more likely you're to get good speech. And again, like we've been saying from the beginning, this is all about practice, right? So we love talking to our customers. We love seeing how they use it. We kind of change the mindset from we've developed something and we let people run wild with it. So whether you're using it with a free trial for a few weeks just to try it out, or you have a full subscription, we want people to be as excited and as imaginative with it as possible. We have plans in the pretty near future to create what we're going to be calling the Extempore Commons, right? So a way for people to share their favorite extempore activity into a
I'm
platform.
going to love that.
Yeah, I know you are, right? Yeah. So the idea is, I can say, hey, I teach English and I have these really cool travel vocabulary exercises that my students love. I'm going to make it available to the extempore community. All the people will give you, can copy it into their accounts and can give you 1 through 5 stars. You can rank by level, by language. But we really want to start fostering the sense of community because, we as app developers will never be able to match the creativity and the ingenuity of our customers, right? So we need to just let people run wild.
Yeah, and this is something that will be, of course, it will be useful for everything, for everybody, every language teacher, but especially so for those teachers of what we call less commonly taught languages. They are the forgotten teachers. They have been forgotten by the publishers. Publishers don't spend that much in those less common, in developing instructional materials that are authentic and that are, that they keep up for those languages just because, the market size, I guess.
Even though in some cases they're the most important languages for many reasons, right?
Yeah, and those teachers really rely on a community, having a community of other teachers, like-minded teachers who are going to be promoting oral skills in their classrooms, and they would love to have those, that space where they can share activities and make their courses better by borrowing from others and also contributing to the commons.
No, we have a lot of very exciting plans for the future, but most of them rely on people's feedback for it as well.
Okay, we hope you enjoyed that, and many thanks to Susana and Carlos for answering our questions.
Oh, well, thank you so much for the time. We actually had a lot of fun doing this, and
thank you. It was a great conversation.
As always, we appreciate hearing from our listeners. So if you'd like to get in touch, you can contact us on email at TEFLology@gmail.com, or you can find us on Twitter @TEFLology, and we also have a Facebook page. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon with another episode. Goodbye.
Yeah, bye.
Thank you, bye.